Welcome to the first official episode of the Scrapbook, a project hosted by teen interns at the Art Institute of Chicago, where we discuss various topics centered around the art world from the perspective of a younger generation. My name is Sumaya Khan. I use she and her pronouns, and I'll be one of your hosts today.
I'm another one of your hosts. My name is Moss, and I use he, him pronouns, and I'm excited for all of you to join us as we dive headfirst into a topic many of us are deeply passionate about.
I'm Isis. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm very excited to host with Moss and Samaya. In today's episode, we will be talking about a broad range of topics related to representation and inclusivity in museums and how we view representation on community.
However, please be aware that we might be exploring some sensitive topics in this discussion, such as sexism, racism, and anti-Blackness specifically. Please be mindful as we get into the episode.
I think that it would be a good idea to kind of start off by defining what we think representation is. I think a lot of the time when we talk about representation in general, a lot of the thing that you'll hear the most is I want to feel seen on the screen, or I want to feel seen in this book, or you just want to be seen in whatever media it is. But I think that there's more substance to that, because visibility doesn't equal representation. At least to me, when I see, I'm Black, and when I see a lot of the way that Black people are depicted in TV or something, I don't necessarily look at them and connect with it. I think that it's visibility from people like you, and it's representation to be done well. It needs to be done by people who are of that sect, I guess, of that community, I think. And if they're not, then I think that they need to find a way to source those voices in some way, It's visibility, but it's three-dimensional in a way. That's what I think of it as.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying, because oftentimes when this push for representation, people often think about like you said, visibility. So that can also lead into a slippery slope to tokenization, because people don't often think about oh, who's behind this push for representation? Is it people from the community? Specifically, if we're pushing from Black characters on screen, is there Black screenwriters writing these characters and stuff? So that's a really good point that you made, and I think it kind of goes into how often representation can be used as an excuse to tokenize people and I don't know, put a quota on something, on amount of people who should be included in the space, instead of opening up the space for everyone, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I agree to it too, because visibility in representation is something that not a lot of people talk about. And I feel it matters a lot, because just not the people out of community, out of your community representing or making you visible in the media or anywhere in the world, but also from your community and how many people are being there,
Yeah, I think it kind of boils down to representation. If I'm going to put this in a succinct definition, one sentence: representation is visibility that responds and creates life. It's not just a flat caricature of what you think a type of person or a type of identity might act like. It's this is a life, or this could be a life. And I don't know, I think it's we can talk a little bit about why that kind of inclusivity, that kind of representation, that kind of being is important. I know that for me personally, yes, I feel really nice when I look on the screen and I see Black people who are responding to my Blackness in a way. But I also know that when I was younger, back in the day when I was younger, I know that I was looking at the screen or whatever, and I was thinking to myself, oh my God, I could be that one day. And I'm thinking specifically of my queerness. I don't think that I would have known that I was queer if it wasn't for the book Love Drugged by James Clyce. That was the first queer book that I'd ever read. And while I had my suspicions, it was also okay, this is a real tangible thing for me right now, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I agree with Moss. I feel it also inspires us when we see someone from our community or someone that we know of. So, for example, I'm Pakistani, so any South Asian I see, or any colored person or a Muslim, I feel like it inspires me, just like Ma said, that I want to become one of them. And I feel, oh, so people from my community are being accepted and what they do is there and recognized in the world. So I think that inspires the future generations as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally get that, and I definitely agree with both of what you guys said. I think like representation and inclusivity, it goes without saying that it's like really important, but it also like kind of what Mom said, it affirms like a part of you that you didn't even know could exist because you don't see it on screen. So being able to like see yourself in like books and art and like poetry and all different type of forms of media is like really important because if there isn't representation, it's like you don't even exist. Like where is your place on the world if you're not represented in that type of way, you know?
Yeah, and it's like not only does representation affirm, it also like does a lot. It takes a lot of like labor off of the hands of the people of marginalized identities. You know what? I need more transmedia to come out quickly because if I have to explain the difference between like pronouns and chosen names or something like that one more time, I think I might go a little bit feral. It's really nice when I meet someone who's like engaged with queer but specifically trans content because that way I don't feel like I have to unpack every single piece of my identity to them just to get like bare minimum respect during our interaction.
Yeah.
You know?
And that kind of makes me think of like this TV show called Euphoria. It was like a really big teen TV show. Thinking of like Jules' character on Euphoria, like that was probably one of the first times I saw like a trans girl represented in like a TV show or like a teen TV show. So I think that was like a really good push for like trans visibility and like a way that like a lot of people don't like see that often. But it kind of makes me think because like if you think about who's writing this show, you know, who's writing this trans character, this very specific part of one's identity. There's only one writer on the show before, you know, it's a white male, a white cis male called Sam Levinson. You know, I would say with Jules' character, has done like a very, I don't want to say skillful, but careful job with the way he's representing her so far, I think. But I'm just thinking like, is that always going to be, you know, possible when we have these people who aren't a part of these marginalized communities writing and representing people on screen that they're not even like a part of the community, you know?
Yeah, I kind of like Jules' character. We could sit there, we could write a thesis about her. Oh my god, like case study on Jules. But I think the way Levinson handled her transness is that he didn't address it. And like it's true for some trans people that they don't like think about their transness every second of the day. I don't know how. It's all that's ever on my mind. But like he touched on her being trans like maybe once or twice. And other than that, it was never like a piece of her life that was brought up. I think like the most that her transness was addressed was her like special episode, which I did not watch that full thing. It was so long.
I really feel like he should have included that special episode because it was so important to her as an identity, like her identity as a trans person. He should have included that in the first season or at least put it in like the second season because it's like a lesser known episode. Everybody didn't really watch it and it was really vital and like touching on her experience as a trans woman. But like since that wasn't included, it just goes to show that like we can't always, I don't want to say trust, but like we can't always, I guess, trust like people who don't belong to these communities to properly represent them on screen, you know?
I think that's exactly how things work in our government or like people in power as well. Just like men taking decisions for women when they don't even know what they're talking about. So I think it's just not the film industry. It's like everywhere we go. So they don't understand, they don't belong to that community or that part of the group, but they are ready to take decisions and they're ready to be part of it. So I think you are right, Isis, that it seems very awkward when we see that. But yeah, that's how they do it.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned power. I think Machi, you talked about representation and power before. Do you want to like?
Yes, I was about to get so excited about that. When you think of representation in like the lens, oh my god, I'm so excited. When you're talking about giving life or representing the life or like having people connect to something, and then you bring up the idea of power, it kind of like who is in control?
Yeah.
God, that sounds like I'm about to dive into conspiracy theory. Who is tapping in? But like seriously, who is in control? What is it? Our society is dominated by cis hetero, patriarchal, Christian and Anglo-Saxon, like all of these primary structures, right? And when you're in power, when you're a figure in power, not only do you like want to control the things,
Yeah.
but also one of your biggest projects, I would say, is like maintaining that power. And if I were POV, Moss is a cis-het white Christian guy, the antithesis of who Moss actually is. But like, pretend that is me for a second. If I was a cis-het white Christian guy, I think that like my thing would be making sure that everyone looks around and sees people like me so that they don't question the fact that I'm the one leading everything. And when you are in these position of powers, you also have the chance to degrade other identities. Like we can think of like, whew, oh my god, we can think of so many examples of bad representation. But because anti-blackness is like one of my biggest fields of study, I'm gonna go there. Sorry. Like just think about all the characters that Black people have had made of them. I think of the mammy archetype. Think of like the Uncle Tom, blah blah blah. The like the gnomes that are Black and like red and stuff, and it's really uncomfortable to look at.
Minstrelsy, stuff like that.
Yes, when you're looking around everywhere and you're seeing Black people as minstrel objects, then why would you put your power in them? Why would you give them a chance to lead for themselves? When they become a subject of humor or something to like actively make fun of, then a Black person no longer has like legitimacy to themselves. So like representation, good representation, is an act of empowerment. It's an act of handing over power to a community that didn't have it before. But it's also an act of like community building, I would say. And I think that like not only do you have a chance to feel seen, but like other people are looking around and they're like, oh my god, wait, you're real. And like to counter that, when you're not properly representing a body of people or whatever, that's like an intentional agenda to make sure that you are maintaining your power. So like to talk about Euphoria, going back to Euphoria, did Sam Levinson have a trans character? Yes. Did Sam Levinson not necessarily directly degrade Jules' transness? I suppose. ...
It can be debated.
Yeah, we could sit there. We could debate about that. But like, would I say that he gave trans people power with that character? Would I say that he shared power with Jules? No, I wouldn't, because he ignored the fact that she was trans for like the majority of the show. What are you talking about? Special episode? Put it in season 1, season 2, or shut up. So that's my little spiel on power and representation.
I know we're talking about like film a lot right now, but that just made me think about just like how powerful film can be as a tool, as a means of oppression. If you think about representation, the lack thereof of representation, film is just like a way for people to like, you know, see things that they. Film is just like a way to like reinforce like power dynamics. If you really think about it, like the way that like this idea of like narrative scarcity, and like some people, like if you think about like the fact that a lot of White people when they watch movies, they don't, if they can't see characters they look like them on screen, they automatically think that like, okay, I can't relate to this, like I'm not the target audience, I shouldn't be watching this. And that's like the biggest divide that like I think is in the way of representation right now on screen, is the fact that most White people, because they're so used to being the norm in this like this really big field and area for such a really long time, because they have the power to do so, like you said, Moss, they aren't willing to like watch other people on screen, because they feel like if it's not kind of all about them in a way, it's like I don't know how to put it like specifically, but I think right now like people are too focused on like relatability, if that makes sense. Like, oh, they feel like, oh, if I can't relate to this character on screen, I probably shouldn't watch this. But it's like you don't actually have to always see yourself on screen in order to like relate to a character. And I feel like if more people who was just like open minded to like watch everybody and like different people on screen, it would like open up the film industry much more, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think just like Moss was talking about people in power, I think in photography, it is very stubbornly male dominated, because we see a lot of male photographers being represented, but not not female. And the ironic thing is that those male photographers are using female bodies to show their skills, which is very, very conflicting. I mean, photography is a form of art that expresses the photographer through pictures, and I think it should not just be female bodies or mainly male photographers doing it. I think there should be more female representation in photography so that more female can be represented and they can feel inspired. And then this will inspire the future generations to come. So, as being someone who likes photography and loves to do it, when I see when I see like a place filled with just male photographers, I feel kind of, oh, will I be able to thrive in that male dominated field? Or should I do it? Is it the right place for me? Or there's another thought that, okay, then I should be the one breaking those glass ceilings, and I should be the one there with when there's less from my community, like from females. So I think, yeah, there is a lot to talk about when it comes to how people in power maintain their power while telling us that there is female representation, just like there is female artists and there are artists of colors as photographers. But I think it was hard to find in the collection when it comes to AIC.
Yeah.
There was, I wouldn't say that there wasn't, but it was more white male photographers. So yeah.
Because I remember I was scrolling through like the collection of the artists who traveled like with you, and I like saw like a lot of like really old white men as like photographers. And it didn't make me think of like, I don't want to say necessarily like dehumanization of women's bodies, but there's basically like just a lot of like subjectivity behind it, and like a lot of male gaze in general, like the way that they were being portrayed and like objectified through this lens kind of.
I think that what you both are kind of touching on is like the exploitation of representation. Because like bad representation is a chance to be like, hey, I did this anyways. Like, who cares if you like it or not? You're here, aren't you? And when I think of like the particular patriarchal relationship that male photographers have with like taking photos of like nude female bodies all the time. Like that in itself, sure, not harmful, but if that is like your only thing, that's like all you're making, if there's such a prevalence of this, that's kind of exploitation of like the female body, while at the same time you're not allowing women to take up space as photographers. And I also kind of want to add like a little asterisk to this. Like I'm speaking in really polarized gendered language, very much binary right now, but like I'm thinking also at the same time, like, okay, I can't name a single non-binary photographer. I can't name a single trans photographer in general, actually. And when we're looking at these like quote unquote female bodies, also, like we are perceiving them to be female. Is that the way that these subjects are identifying as? And it makes me think that like representation needs to be something that is like when you're being inclusive, you need to be audible about it. You need to be direct. You need to be intentional about it. And you could be like, okay, well, this person might be non-binary. That's not something that people are going to assume right off the bat, like if they look at this subject. So like the silence on like whether non-binary people exist in photography or film or whatever, that's also a form of like making sure that they're not being represented. It's like intentional quietness on that. So
that made me think of this show called Sex Education on Netflix. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but basically one of the characters identifies as non-binary. And they identify as non-binary in like real life. So like I'm pretty sure the writer made sure that the character that the person played was like non-binary, so they wouldn't have to like contort themselves to fit into like the binary gender, spectrum. And I really think that's really important as well when you're thinking of like gender identity on screen, because like you said, it's kind of hard to just like look at a break like, oh, they're non-binary. She identifies as female. You have to specifically write in those type of things. It has to be like loud and audible, like how you said, because otherwise people are just going to take it as like, the automatic societal norm, which is female or male. So yeah, that's a really big part of it. And also, it made me think of like screenwriting in general because I know we're talking about like film and photography right now, but I think people often get too caught up in like on-screen representation. They don't think about like who's writing. But yeah, that makes me think of like on-screen representation and like how people often focus. I don't want to say too heavily because on-screen representation is really important as we've like discussed, But I think there's also needs to be a push for representation like behind the camera in terms of photography and like filmmaking because if the people who are like making these films or like shooting these pictures or like writing these screenplays, if they aren't in touch with like these communities that they're trying so hard to represent, it just often leads into like exploitation, like you said, like because you're not a like, community, you can't make sure that like you're properly representing these people if you don't even know where they're coming from.
Yeah, I think this is what happened with when I was searching the photographers. There is basically no pronouns mentioned by their name. So I first of all I assumed a lot of female photographers that they were not female. When I searched them up, the names were different because it's not like people are gonna have a very female looking like name because they're a female. They can have names that may be different than what we perceive as. So half of the time I had to Google like if they are female or if they're male or what their pronouns are because I think when we are living in 2022, mentioning of pronouns is very important so that it is easier for the person or the audience to know who they are or who they identify as.
Yeah.
So there is no misconception. And just like there is representation behind the screen going on too, and what they are telling is also there. So I think it goes that way too, that there should be, so that it's easier for the audience to recognize, because that's what was hard for me too. Then I had to like Google every other name to find out what their pronouns are so that I'm not using the wrong pronouns.
Yeah, I think that it goes down to like, are you giving the artist the space to identify themselves? Like, this isn't talking about how they're identifying their art, because art is subjective and da 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 da, all that. But like, are you giving the space to the artist to be like, "Hi, my name is artist. I use these pronouns." Because pronouns don't equal gender. I am a gender. Like, are you giving the artist a space to kind of define themselves? And like, I don't think that it needs to be done in that like super formalized way.
Yeah.
Because if like I had to read, "Hi, my name is artist. My pronouns are pronouns, and my gender is gender," 70 times, I would be sick of it. But I think that just like maybe that kind of declaration is a part of art. Maybe the lack of a declaration can be considered a part of art. I think that if we take a transformative approach to like how we let people represent themselves, and if we look at that as like a piece of their creation, then we give them the space to really make sure that they're not being misrepresented by the people who are consuming whatever media is there. And Samara, I kind of wanted to ask you about you said that you were having a hard time finding photographers of color and women photographers in the collection. Did you manage to stumble on any by any chance?
Yeah, I did. So there are current exhibitions that feature artists of color. I would like to name like two. I think if I'm pronouncing them right, Basmaral Sharif and Subscribe. These are two current exhibitions that are featuring the artist of color. And there are also other photographers or maybe artists, we can call them. They are in different departments of AIC, such as modern, contemporary, photography, and media. There are a lot of female and artists of color photographers, but it was hard for me to find. But I found them in different departments, such as modern, contemporary, photography, and media, and other departments. And one thing I also noticed was that there are female photographers like Eleanor Anton, if I'm pronouncing it right. They also show feminist movement and ideologies during that time when they were photographers. So I think female photographers themselves are not using female bodies to show their skills, but male photographers are doing that. So I think maybe they are taking it away from them, or maybe female photographers don't want to do that male photographers are doing. Because when we see the female photographers, they're using it for how things or images are like representing power generated stuff. Like for example, Barbara Kruger in The Devil uses text-based images in which she deconstructs representation of power generated by the commercial media, particularly as they affect women. And then there is Carrie Mae Weems that pairs photography and text to make incisive comments on race, gender, and politics of representation. So you see all these female artists, but they're doing different stuff than what male photographers you see in the collection are doing.
Yeah. Like on the note of Barbara Kruger, actually, how we were just talking about how it's important to let artists define themselves? I had the absolute pleasure, best day of my life, actually. I had the absolute pleasure of talking to Kruger herself. And what I think is interesting, because you kind of juxtaposed Kruger's art with Eleanor Anton's art, because Anton, you said, shows feminist ideology and represents feminist movements. I would say that when I look at Kruger's art, I see a lot of that myself. Like I see critiques on capitalism, on consumerism, on patriarchy, just like all of that. But like when we were talking to her, what I thought was interesting was that she explicitly was like, don't categorize my art as feminist art. Don't categorize my art as anti-capitalist art. Don't blah, 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 blah. Like, she was very adamant about not, like, genreizing. Is that even a word? I don't know. About putting her into a box. Don't label the kind of art that she makes. And I think that is, like, a useful thing to look at in terms of, like, okay, you might look at a piece of art and you're like, this is representing this. But sometimes people don't make art and think that's what they're doing. So Kruger, for example, is making art that I'm looking at and I'm like, okay, you're critiquing capitalism. You are an anti-capitalist artist. She says no. So I think that it's like interesting to see the difference, the kind of schism between artist and consumer when it comes to deciding what representation even means.
Yeah.
So that's just a thought.
Yeah, that kind of poses the question, like if artists choose not to like label their art that's like, feminist or like anti-capitalist, like just different things, so like genres they can make it in, does that take away like the message behind the art? Because I feel like if it isn't directly saying like, oh, this is a feminist piece of art, can it even be like categorized as such, if that makes sense? Like, is there even a meaning behind the art if the artist outright refuses to like label it as such?
I feel like sometimes they leave it to the audience for how they perceive it. I feel like that's a safe way to go, because then you're not categorizing it yourself. Because just like Ma said, not everyone can talk to Kruger and know what she was thinking when she was doing that art. But when we see it as a consumer or like as an audience, it has a different meaning. So I think people or the artists who are not categorizing are leaving it to the audience themselves. Maybe it's a safe way to go, or maybe they are open to critique.
I feel like it is a safe way to go, but like when we're talking about representation, I don't know if it's like the most transformative way to approach art. Like,
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, I don't want to conform to like the societal labels. Sometimes labels can be good for us art, but we're making sure that like people are being represented in like a space so predominantly white, like the art world. It's kind of necessary sometimes to like label and identify like, oh, this is saying something, this is a statement, this is representing something,
We talked about representation needing to be audible and stuff like that. And when I think about, does that take away the message? Like, even when I was talking about Kruger, like not identifying her art in a certain way, I'm like, I wonder if that doesn't serve these movements.
Yeah.
But I also think that, like, this is case by case. Take this with a grain of salt. But I also think that silence or not saying something can be reclamatory in a way. Reclamatory, I think is the word. Like, I'm a poet. I read poetry sometimes. I mostly write it. I really love reading my own. Anyways, but I'm a poet, and when I like navigate the poetry world, the realm of poetry, like automatically people are like, poetry is for old white men, it's written by old white men. And that directly undercuts the work that I'm doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's also like, okay, well, and I wasn't defining my poetry as Black poetry. Like I'm Black, I write things. That doesn't necessarily mean it's Black poetry, question mark. But like I've had time to kind of ruminate over that. And like I think that is not true for me, because I know that for me, I want to prioritize a transformation. I want to prioritize community building. I want to prioritize representing people in spaces where they didn't feel like they belonged. So like, yes, not all of my poetry, very few of it actually revolves around me being Black. But it doesn't change the fact that like I am a Black poet. I'm a Black trans man sitting down and writing about like, you know, the silly little trees or whatever. Like I am writing about how maybe my eyes hurt one time, whatever I write about. But like I'm still doing that as a trans Black man. And me saying that this is Black trans poetry, no matter what it's about. It could be about the chair that's across the room from me right now. That still does a service to people who were like thinking, oh my God, poetry is for old white men. Mm-hmm. And then like on the subject of not saying it, this actually goes into a Black poet, a Black trans poet, a Black queer poet. What I think is really interesting about their name is like it's like the way that it's stylized is it's like S**AN Henry Smith, D Henry Smith, right? And like some people read that as Sean, some people read that as like whatever other letter you can put in there. I don't know. But like not saying, like not having every single letter in that name, that is silence in a way. But it also like it stabs out at you. You are forced to look at this name and be like, how do I say that out loud? Yeah. You know? And I think that demand to like look at this, look at their name, look at Henry Smith's name and be like, okay, how do I say that? That's like also you looking at this Black poet, this also a Black photographer actually. Go buy the book Wild Peach, because it has really pretty photos in it. But like that is forcing you to allow this poet, this photographer, this person to take up space. So like maybe silence can, maybe not labeling your work, maybe not saying something can be a way of protest, a way of reclamation, a way of empowerment, a way of insert another synonym here. I think it just needs to be super strategic. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So this also reminds me of my history class actually, that there are a lot of females, they don't use their first name so that people can't identify them as female, but they use their last names for their work. And in this way, it was seen that those artists or like photographers or people in general had higher like popularity as compared to the ones who mentioned their names back in the time. So I think Moss pointing out this was a very important thing, that because they are different, they had to do something different for them to reach their audience and to feel represented in that society where they're not as common. So I think, yeah, this is something to think about and find solutions for.
Yeah, kind of going off of what Samaya was saying, you don't want to like force people to like label, identify their work. And what Moss was saying, you don't want to let people like shoehorn themselves into like conforming into like a specific identity, because then it kind of, I don't want to bring this back to film again, but it makes me think about like film in the way that like some people, once they see like one Black person on screen, like, oh, this is a Black film. Or they see like a Black filmmaker behind them, they're like, oh, this is a film for Black people, you know? It's not always about like specifically shoehorning them into like this category based off of their race, you know, because I do feel like that's oppressive in itself, even though it can be done to like push representation, because it like forces people to like conform to what people think Blackness should be, you know.
Yeah.
It doesn't really let them venture outside that.
Like representation can be a way of like, if it's not you that's being represented on the screen or like wherever, I keep on going back to that phrase. Like, we hear on the screen everywhere. But if it's not you being represented in whatever media it is, then like maybe that's just a chance for you to sit back and respect it. Like respect the lives that are and the creators who are like giving this piece of art to you. Maybe it's like you don't have to feel like you're on the screen to enjoy a piece of media. Maybe you just like appreciate the experience of
Yeah.
being able to interact with a different walk of life than yours. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes me think of this one movie I watched like a couple of days in movie theaters. It's called Everywhere, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And basically, like, it's so good. It's so good. Like, I urge everybody please to watch it. Like, it's so good. And basically, the majority of the cast is like Asian American. It's about like this middle-aged Asian American woman who feels like this content with her life, and like it just goes into like a really big existential type of quest, a very philosophical like type of experience that happens because she kind of feels like she's at a point in her life that she doesn't really like, you know. And it just made me think like that's probably one of the best films I've ever seen. But I can't think of one black person that came on the screen. But like still, I was able to like relate to people in the movie. So it just kind of goes to show that like sometimes you don't have to see yourself in something in order to relate to it. And I just feel like more white people should feel that way.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of connects to the idea of like representation doesn't just need to be of like identities or whatever. It can also be like what ideas are getting to be represented. I'm going to read an excerpt from the essay, Poetry is Not a Luxury, and it's by Audre Lorde. And this essay is so special and significant to me. One, shout out to Audre Lorde. Love them. XOXO. But also this, when I read this essay, this is like the first time that I ever gave weight to my art form. So from Poetry is Not a Luxury. I speak here of poetry as the revelation or distillation of experience, not the sterile wordplay that too often the white fathers distorted the word poetry to mean in order to cover their desperate wish for imagination without insight. For women, then, poetry is not a luxury. It is a vital necessity of our existence. It forms the quality of light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams towards survival and change. First made into language, then into idea, then into more tangible action. So I'm going to summarize that a little bit and make it a little bit more digestible. When we think of poetry, a lot of people think of just like wordplay. It's rhyming. It's like stanzas. It's da-da-da-da. But the definition that Lorde assigns poetry right now is like it is telling a story. It is telling an experience. It's breaking down an experience in a way that other people can kind of consume it. Poetry inherently is representation. And like for women, I'm not a woman, but like when I think of this, I think, okay, for marginalized people, poetry is not a luxury. Like that distillation of experience is absolutely vital for our survival, right? And it's the way that we like dream. It's the way that we look at something and think, oh my God, this is what the world can become, right? And first we have that thought. First we read this, then we have that thought, and then we feel like we can act, right? And that like transfer of ideology to action, I think is really, really important when you think about representation. Because now you can connect with something in a way that you couldn't before because you've just like kind of seen it, you know, you've kind of experienced it in like whatever way that you could. And then it's a more tangible action. You know, one thing about Audre Lorde, she was praxis oriented. We all want to be like her. Slay. You know, just a thought.
Yeah. I also write poetry. I don't really write that much as I often should though, but that made me think of like maybe like because I know you said poetry is not a luxury, but it kind of makes me think of like representation should be a luxury even. Like it should be just a given. And like you said, poetry in a way is representation because through the act of like describing these very specific experiences, these very specific feelings that people have and like often portrayed through poetry, it's a way to like get a little look into other people's lives and the way that they view things and such. So I think poetry and representation really do go hand in hand. I feel like
Yeah, I think that is true because in my English class, specifically literature, when I was reading white men doing poetry, it was all about them objectifying females at that time when they wrote that. So it also tells us about what society they lived in and how we have progressed throughout these years. Like we can differentiate between how they used to think back then and then how things are now. So I think we can see the artist or the specific community they are from of like how they think or what they went through their words.
I think that like what you were saying, like these old white men writing poetry that like serves patriarchal ideas. It kind of responds to the idea of like when you create art, you are going to perpetuate an ideology that you hold stake in.
Yeah.
I don't like you can't separate the art from the artist because the artist is making the art from themselves. You know what I mean? And like when I started reading Black poetry, like I endeavor not to read poetry that isn't by Black people. And I do that because I think it's important to sometimes just like have a certain media, a certain space that like it isn't like you need an echo chamber at least once in your life because sometimes you go into a different space, people aren't like you, they're going to always disagree. I think poetry for me is a space to have everyone agree with me all of the time. It is the only space in my life where that can happen, and I'm gonna hold on to it. They're going to inject I think that kind of whatever ideologies they might carry into it. It's just like unavoidable. Like they're creating that art themselves, so obviously their thoughts and opinions of this world is going to take. It's going to be seen in that. And I'm kind of like I'm responding to the idea of like men taking photos, male photographers making photography that like serves the patriarchy through the objectification of women. And like I know that when I started reading more Black poetry, when I started taking in more Black art, I started seeing a lot more ideas that aligned with mine. I'm an Afro-pessimist, and Afro-pessimism is a framework that asserts that human life, that society as we know it, is fundamentally built upon the exclusion, enslavement, and death of Black people. And that is a quote from Zora's Daughters, an awesome Black woman run anthropological podcast that I really love. Shout out to them. If you guys are listening, can I like follow me back on Instagram? But like, yeah, so Afro-pessimism says that society is built upon the exclusion, enslavement, and death of Black people. There's obviously a lot more nuance to that, but like it kind of, when I look at Black art, I see things that align with that. But when I go outside of art that isn't meant to navigate Blackness in the way that like Black art, capital B, is designed to, then I don't really see as much of those Afro-pessimist ideas. And I brought up the poet Henry Smith earlier today, and I like was like, go buy Wild Peach. You definitely should. It's so good. But like, there's an excerpt from their book, from the poem Calm Down. It starts like this. This predates the perennial, a gesture of quietude and its denial. Gentle hum, our glaring hymn. Pray that all falsehoods rot. Triplet, triple, tongue, triple. Thick tongue to protect what is ours. That's ours with the H. And the slippage of time. Like how when I say Black, I mean everything in the destruction of time. August and its collateral absentina. Linear dysfunctions are long overdue. Disrupt the grotesque. We demand a rapid beauty. Rancid botany. What we are owed. One, that's gorgeous. Henry Smith plays a lot with ideas of nature in their poetry to explore like larger ideas of Blackness and queerness. Go buy their book, Wild Peach. Thank you so much. But like I want to focus on the lines, like how when I say Black, I mean everything in destruction of time. That is straight Afro-pessimism right there. Everything and the destruction of time. Blackness in Afro-pessimism is something that subverts like every material record system that we have. Like Blackness is not ontological in the framework of Afro-pessimism, meaning that like to be Black is to be excluded from the category human. And like it makes sense that if you're excluded from the category human, you're excluded from things like time, you're excluded from like whatever systems that make sense for everyone else, because your Blackness says that you aren't like everyone else inherently, right? And also the line, we demand a rapid beauty, rancid botany, what we are owed. Disrupt the grotesque. We demand a rabid beauty, rancid botany, what we are owed. That line to me speaks to the idea that Frantz Fanon wrote about in his The Wretched of the Earth, where it's like, if you want to no longer be oppressed, you must kind of destroy society as we know it.
Mhm.
And like, I'm speaking in conceptual terms right now. I don't mean don't burn down anything. Burn down. Can I get second voices on this?
Don't burn down.
Anything. Okay.
No fire, okay? But like, it's like you are demanding this representation. You are demanding to be included in this category of time and human condition, and blah 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 blah. And disruption is a really good idea. It's a good way of thinking of how you can insert new ideas into media, which I think is really interesting. I kind of I like went a lot of different directions here, but to summarize everything that I just said, beautiful listeners, art is a chance to represent ideas that wouldn't get represented otherwise. And art is also a chance for an artist to speak to a specific group of people who will understand what they're saying. And it's a chance to expose new ideas to people who would never get it before. Go buy the book Wild Peach. It's a lovely book.
I don't think I'm smart enough to quite fully grasp pessimism at this point, but I'll get
I
there.
disagree. I disagree. You are smart enough, and you are smart enough. The thing about Afro-pessimist theory, the thing about any academic theory, is it's so non-accessible.
Yeah.
It's so hard to look at all these big words like ontology and just know what it means. You know what, the book Afro-Pessimism by Frank B. Wilson III? I own it. I've been annotating it. I've had this book for almost 2 years now. Guess who's still not finished with it? This guy right here.
Yeah, that kind of goes into like academia as a whole. I know it's like different from the art world, but it's kind of like similar in the fact that like it's very gatekeeping. I want to say like they're like a lot of academics, a lot of researchers. I know like they dedicate all these years to like researching these things. So of course they want to like present it in the most succinct way possible, but it's not accessible. You know, it's always really wordy and really hard to understand on purpose. I think. So.
Yeah. And like sometimes, like I get that in academic circles, you need jargon like ontology and like
Can you explain ontology to me?
Oh yeah, I can definitely. Should I explain right
now? Yeah,
like,
just a quick definition.
Ontology basically is the philosophical field of like the study of existence. In like, if I'm gonna speak about Afro-pessimism specifically, like Afro-pessimism defines ontology as a study of human existence. It's a very anthropocentric viewpoint, but like See, that was me using big words after we just complained about it. Anthropocentrism is that you're censoring humans in discussions about existence. But yeah, that's what ontology is. But like what I was saying is, like, yes, I get it. You are at the University of Chicago. Please let me in for grad school. You are at the University of Chicago. Please let me in for grad school. Like, I made it.
Our dream school.
I think he wants to go to the University of Chicago.
Yeah, but you're at the University of Chicago talking to all your professor, PhD colleagues, or whatever. Of course, you're going to use big words. But like, you know, why does academia need to exist? Why do fields need to exist in one censored space, you know? Like with art, we have the advantage of like, we can turn on a TV, we can download a PDF, but like, there's so much in the Art Institute of Chicago that like, you gotta go. You have to come here to see it, which you definitely should. Really great, love it here. But I don't know. I think that part of that inaccessibility has to do with the fact that people will physically limit themselves and physically limit their fields to like one confined space, which obviously is like a nuanced idea, has its pros and cons, but you know.
And if we think about like the Art Institute of Chicago, like particularly, I know I didn't come here until like I was in 9th grade, I think, because like I just didn't see it like as an accessible like place to be at. You know, I live on the south side of Chicago, but it's like downtown, you know. So there is like barriers in place, like physical barriers that keep a lot of like teens and like just different diverse people from visiting art museums because there is like an air of exclusivity around it, you know, by like geological location and by like the pretentiousness that often, you know, regulates these type of spaces.
Yeah, although it exists, like representation and inclusivity is there in a lot of areas, but still there's a lot of need of improvement, I believe.
Yeah, I think that it's really easy to sit around and talk about bad representation. Like, we just kind of did that for a while. But like also it is important to think of representation as an opportunity to be transformative and to actively build. And like, yeah, you might not see some things in the Art Institute, for example, yet. But that doesn't mean they're coming. And I think that kind of like hopeful way of looking at it, the way of understanding that representation is a vitality that is going to manifest itself eventually.
Please like and subscribe to support our future projects. We'd love to hear any feedback you might have on today's discussion. Feel free to comment your thoughts below or tell us about what you would like to see at your local museum.
We are so grateful for the people who have supported us on this journey and continue to push us to talk about the topics we are passionate about.
Thank you all for sticking around to the end, and we'll catch everyone next time on the next episode of Scrapbook.
This is Team Council, signing off.